Okay, you all, welcome. And in this presentation, I'll be preparing you for how to deliver your presentation online. In the 492 online class, you just deliver one presentation called the funding presentation, which I'll tell you more about. And it's a 30-minute presentation in which you pretend that your audience, which is me and any class members who attend, is the foundation board that you're applying for money to. And I'll tell you more about that. There are sample funder presentations or funding presentations posted on Canvas, so I encourage you to check those out. So what I'll be talking about in this presentation is just some presentation logistics, how to cope with public speaking anxiety, general presentation tips, and then funding presentation specifics. Okay, so let's start with presentation logistics. So you're going to be signing up for a 1-hour time slot with me on Zoom, and you're going to give a live or synchronous 30-minute presentation. I am going to invite the rest of the class to attend, but it's not a requirement, so we'll see who shows up. Following your 30-minute presentation, there'll be a 5-minute question and answer that'll include me and the class if anyone is present, and then we'll excuse any class members present, and we'll have 25 minutes to debrief about how this process has been for you, both writing the whole written proposal as well as preparing the oral presentation, and then I'll give you some informal feedback on your funding presentation, and I'll post formal feedback after the fact. You'll hear this theme maybe come up again in this presentation, but in terms of logistics, the more that you can practice as a group on Zoom prior to delivering to me, the better things will go and the higher score you'll get. Okay, let's talk about public speaking anxiety. Probably 30% of the class suffers from this. Maybe it's less if you're doing it on Zoom and not standing in front of a group of people. Here's my general tips, and I'd encourage you to talk with your group members and exchange other bits of advice. So obviously the more you practice, even though it's a pain to practice, the more comfortable you'll feel. Yet you don't want to practice so much that you end up sounding like a robot and everything's completely memorized. One thing that I have learned to do is when I'm nervous about giving a presentation, I remind myself that I'm a leader in the room, and so my goal is to make everybody else comfortable or relaxed or engaged, and that I have to be kind of friendly in order to do that. And so keeping that in mind as my goal or my role kind of keeps me out of my nervousness a little bit, because I'm kind of putting it aside for the greater good. I also focus on the knowledge that I'm sharing, or my conviction about this material, or what I'm hoping they're going to end up coming away with. And when I focus more on that, I'm less focused on, I try not to focus on what I look like, what I sound like, in that moment. For me, exercising before some good cardiovascular exercise always reduces stress, calms nerves. Protein helps so that you don't have crashing blood sugar while you're presenting. Obviously, we all hear about kind of making ourselves breathe. I definitely don't want you to expect perfection. If you're expecting that you're going to say everything absolutely perfectly, that's going to set such a high bar that you're going to be really tense. So it's okay to make mistakes, misspeak, have to go back and clarify. I mean, you want to be prepared and practiced, but not perfect. And caffeine, I'd consider kind of how it affects you. So for example, a little bit of caffeine helps me find my words and kind of turn on. Too much caffeine will make me speak really, really fast. So use it with caution, I suppose. Okay, let's go over some general presentation tips before we get into specifics on the funding presentation. All right, let's talk about some general speaking skills. So as I mentioned, your speaking style isn't robotic, it isn't completely memorized, you're not like a teleprompter, right? So you're trying to take the stance of being calm and professional because you're wanting this funding board to have confidence in you. You're going to be extemporaneous. So it's going to be very tempting in a Zoom presentation to be reading from your notes. But I'm going to encourage you to have kind of just an outline of key points and then not kind of have it being said word for word, because that really detracts. We start to disengage when people are reading word for word. You're trying to kind of think about having a not too high pitch because you're really nervous, so a lower pitched, kind of well-paced. Volume isn't as much of an issue on Zoom as it is when you're trying to speak to an entire room. You're going to try to be engaging, again, conversational, not a teleprompter. You want to really be talking to your audience, not just talking to empty space, right? So find us, on Zoom and talk to us. And I would say, look at the camera as much as possible. So you'll notice on these videos, I try to do that. I might glance down at what I have to say, but then I look back up so that it looks like I'm making eye contact with you all. I bet you've learned this in a public speaking class, along the way. But the three things that you can be thinking about as you underline your funding presentation are these ethos, pathos, and logos. So you're trying to create a sense of credibility and trustworthiness that you have the knowledge and the skills to pull this evidence-based program off. You're trying to draw on that pathos, that your audience's desire to help people in need. And then your logos. You're really trying to kind of talk about what the logic is, the evidence is behind this, your logic for the way you're structuring the program, how you think it's going to solve this problem. That can be things like data and statistics. Okay, so I'd aim for professional appearance, at least from the waist up, what we can see online. And you want to use professional titles. So remember the titles that you came up with on the cover letter, like positions that exist at your current agency, not in the program that you're proposing, because that doesn't even exist yet. So you wouldn't even have a job, right, in that yet. I mean, you might at some point say, I would be the person taking on that role if you want, but come up with a title for yourself that makes sense from the agency that you're writing this proposal from, and use it. Introduce yourself that way and stay in that role. You're not a student as you give this presentation. You're in that role at the agency. You want to demonstrate, right, your command of the material, and you can really believe that the amount of time that you all have put in at this point, you are the experts. You know more than I do, and so you can have confidence in that. It's also okay to be enthusiastic. So sometimes people get so serious and so focused that everything seems kind of flat and nobody's smiling. So it's okay to be smiling, enthusiastic, proud, friendly, kind of that will all help your audience be engaged. So practice like you're giving a presentation, a professional presentation. How can you do that in an engaging, friendly, professional way? And you want to be supportive of your group members. So somebody might make a mistake. You don't want to roll your eyes, have huffy breath, and obviously you might not even be on screen, so we wouldn't see that anyway, but you want to just really create an atmosphere of teamwork and support. You all look at so much PowerPoint as students. You probably have a sense of what makes for a good PowerPoint slide and what doesn't. So you want to try to strike that balance, that Goldilocks zone of not too much text on a slide, but not too little that we can't kind of track, everything that you're saying. So you're trying to have the appropriate amount of information, sufficient number of slides. If you end up talking for a long time about something, that often means that you might need multiple slides on it rather than just one. You're going to aim for at least a minimum of 20-point font, maybe higher, depending upon what you can fit. You're aiming for attractive layout and graphics. There's all sorts of functions like I use for design ideas, or the designer in PowerPoint to automatically make things look nice. it seems like that your slide timing, you kind of know what's coming, it's well managed, it seems smooth. You'll have to be kind of working together on that. So you can be cueing each other, next slide if you want. And that if you're giving data, it's best to be kind of presenting that in charts or graphs so things aren't too overwhelming. When you're building any presentation, you want to be thinking, what do I want them to end up this presentation knowing? When they walk away, what am I hoping they're going to remember, talk about, share with? I will often think, what do I want them to be talking about at the dinner table or applying, you know, in their professional or personal lives? So kind of having the key points in mind. And then you want to be thinking about what they already know and what might be their personal experience. And so, you know, just for example, if you were talking to teachers, you'd want to be acknowledging, or parents, you'd want to be acknowledging what they already know, you know, that they have a lot of expertise or experience, or as you might imagine, you might say things, or as you already know, you know, given your experience, you know that blah, blah, blah happens, or I bet you have ideas on this. In this presentation, you're going to be, we'll get more into that, you're pretending that we are a foundation board, the funders. And so you'll be talking as if, because you know your foundation board has already kind of got some orientation to these issues and problems. So you can be alluding to that, as you're well aware, you know, homelessness is a key issue among our youth, you know, if that's the direction that you're going, or, you know, as you're aware, substance use issues are pervasive in our society and challenging to change, you know, so you can make comments like that. You also want to be thinking about their personal experience, right? You don't want to be talking about people who use substances like they're bad people, because you've probably got some in your audience. You don't want to be talking about people who have, you know, perpetrated domestic violence as if they're monsters, because they may be in your audience. Domestic violence is a lot more common than we realize. Same with teen pregnancy. Like any issue that your problem or issue that you're talking about, you want to be talking about it as if the people who are struggling with it are also right in front of you. So you want to be saying it in a compassionate and not pathologizing way. And then, of course, you want to be thinking about how to present your information logically to prevent confusion. We've all sat through presentations where we just couldn't figure out where it was going or what the point was, or things were unclear, and you're proposing this big project. And so you don't want to get sidetracked on something interesting that is actually going to confuse your audience. You know, so for example, a video that seems really fun, but it actually is going to lead your audience to think that you're doing something that you're not, right? So just be thinking all that through too. Okay. I want you to think about, as when you're setting up this funding presentation, that you're going to have some introductory information, kind of like you had in your cover letter, where you get us started, you orient us to the issue, your agency, you know, things like that, what you're proposing, and then you can go into the body, which is, you know, kind of running through all your proposal sections. And then you're going to highlight everything again, really drive your key points home. Remember that in the middle, people pay attention the most at the beginning and the end, so that's why you kind of say all the crucial information in a summary in the beginning and the end, because people stop paying attention midway through. Okay, so we are going to have Q&A from me and any class members who are present. I'd love to hear all group members involved in the responses. Get yourself in the right mindset for questions. Think of them as a compliment, that people care enough to ask you questions. We will be trying to ask them in curious rather than like challenging ways, you know. So try to perceive it as a compliment rather than a challenge. It's okay to say something like, that's a good question. I'm not sure we've considered that. Let me see what the group has, or we could consider that. Or what are your thoughts on that? Okay, so let's talk more about some specifics related to the funding presentation. Okay, Let's talk more specifically about the funding presentation. So as I mentioned, it's targeted to the board of directors of the foundation that you wrote your cover letter to, or if you're doing the parent corporate organization. So you're imagining that they've read through written grant proposals and they've narrowed it down to maybe 2 or 3 and that they want to invite in for an oral presentation. So you're going to be presenting basically everything that you've written about in your written proposal. And you're going to make it add some things in to make it a little more engaging. So going back to that kind of pathos, pulling on the heartstrings of your audience, you're going to be trying to get them to have empathy, compassion, motivation to really get a sense of what it's like to be a person struggling with this problem if they're not familiar with that and want to make a change, want to give money, right, to make a change. So you can be using things like a little vignette. You can make up a story about a participant or a client at your agency and why this program might benefit them. If you find videos online that are relevant, that aren't confusing, right, that help kind of highlight either the evidence-based program that you've selected, which is always great to find a video on, short clips, or something about the problem, right, to help it come alive, right? So you're really trying to kind of paint a really clear picture. You also are going to be, anytime you're kind of saying things, you want to elaborate if you can with examples or specifics. So if you're talking about how you're going to recruit at local participants from local agencies, you might say, for example, we have colleagues at agency, Turning Point and at the Matthews House, and we'll be contacting them, emailing our flyers, discussing ways that we can best market our program to their participants, something like that, right? And then it's also okay to repeat key points. You can be a little more repetitive than you think, because even though you know this really well and you feel like you're being repetitive, and obviously we don't want to be too redundant, the key things like, the need for the program or the effectiveness of the program or the structure of the program maybe are worth repeating so that people aren't confused. All right, a bit more about the funding presentation. Make sure you introduce yourselves early. Use the titles that you came up with on the cover letter associated with your agency. Just like you did for your cover letter, go ahead and provide an overview at the beginning in your presentation so we clearly know who you are, what you're doing, and where you're going with this, and then you can go more into depth. In this presentation, each person needs to present equally. There is an individual presentation grade that comes with this, and so it's based on kind of, I'm not going to be necessarily timing it down to the second, but I'm looking that each person is presenting equally. Sometimes it works better to have people present chunks rather than kind of switching every couple of minutes, but I'll defer to you on that. You definitely want to refer to one another and previous information as you transition. So now I'm going to turn it over to so-and-so who's going to talk with you more about our target population. And then that person comes on and says, thanks, Nancy. As Nancy said, I'm going to be focusing on the target population. So just those kinds of little things. Or, as Jamal explained to you, this program has strong evidence behind it, that kind of thing. Okay. And again, you're trying to go for that more natural conversation. Okay, so you're going to be submitting your funding presentation twice, first as a draft for me to give you feedback on, and then as a final. So here's the requirements for the draft. The first is that you've addressed all the proposal sections. The second is that you give that kind of program snapshot of your evidence-based program, what it is that you're getting funding for and what it looks like. It's an 8-week group, it's a 2-week summer camp, it's a, those kinds of, it's a program for third graders infused into classroom material, led by the primary teachers, I don't know, just explain it, in a nutshell. I put this I highlighted this because it often gets missed. You do have to give some creative additions you know, a video clip. And again, you want to keep it short, you know, I'd say less than 4 minutes for a 30-minute presentation total, or a vignette that you made up, a case example. If you have a couple of slideshows or a couple of slides that kind of act as a slideshow with pictures and stats kind of highlighting the issue for your population, could be ideas. And again, you could make things up. I mean, not data, but like stories about people. Again, if you've got some video, it's not too long, and it seems to be clarifying, not just something fun that you found online that actually makes us think, wait, are you running this program? Because I thought you were doing this. And then we do ask that you go ahead and have in-text citations and a reference slide for your draft. For the slides, I'll also be looking for an appropriate amount of information, sufficient number of slides, the font size is readable, and that you've got a nice, attractive layout with graphics or graphs and charts. And make sure you just take a look at the rubric online so that you know how I'm going to score you so that you can really maximize your points. I don't want you to think of this as a rough draft. I want you to think of it as if you think you're submitting your full, final, complete draft. I'm going to grade it really rigorously. Okay, so for your final funding presentation, again, take a look at the rubric, but I'm basically giving you points for explaining each section well, points for professionalism, points for your speaking style, and this is all broken down more on the rubric, points for the quality of your PowerPoint slides, and then points for presentation structure. And I am going to highlight that here because it's not quite as intuitive as these other items. So for presentation structure, I'm looking for those 1 to 2 creative additions that make it engaging, that it's well timed so you don't end, you know, 5 minutes early. So that's one reason why to practice, is to make sure that you're well timed. I'll be more likely to take off for ending too early than I would for going too long. That you're talking as if we are the foundation board of directors or the parent company executive board or something like that. That you give a clear overview at the beginning and you introduce your proposed evidence-based program early on. You give a clear rationale for it. You have smooth transitions between presenters and media. So when you show a video, you don't just want to be like, drop it out there and don't say anything about it. Say, I'm going to show a video of a program, of our evidence-based program being implemented at another school. I'm hoping that you'll pay attention to such and such and such and such. And then afterwards you'd say maybe, so that gives you a sense of what the evidence-based program would look like. However, I want to point out that we'd be doing it with 3rd graders, not 1st graders, as was depicted in this video. So kind of giving some context around your media. Again, you've got those engaging examples and specifics that makes the target population struggling with this issue really come alive. You've got high quality and good use of your AV material. Everything is logical, clear, and well organized. And you've got that convincing conclusion. So that often gets missed to kind of really drive home your key points again at the end. And so you want to have that in there. As always, feel free to pop into office hours with even a early draft of your PowerPoint, and I'm happy to help.